In
You
some
put a
in some instances, like a steroid could be life-saving, no doubt. And like there are certain interventions and medical applications that can be in an acute situation can be very helpful. But in general, yeah, the whole ethos in medicine is to attribute to a drug or intervention the curative power or the healing power. And that's just because I don't think they understand the nature of the phenomenon of disease or the bigger picture of what health really is, biological health. So they're just, yeah, like you're saying, attacking symptoms, suppressing symptoms, thinking that the symptom is a indication of a pathogenic infection or a genetic malfunction or a breakdown in the body. They have this what I call the dark ages model of disease where they just see it as like nature gone rogue. And so their only counterbalance to that is to essentially attack the body and they end up causing so much more harm because they don't understand the natural phenomenon that they're observing and treating, quote unquote. Yeah, I actually got a little trouble on this server. Well, I think what was his name? Research Flat Earth Moon jumped on, but I had brought up a topic which I believe to be like the breakthrough discovery in medicine relative to this question of what is disease, what causes disease. And it's called German New Medicine, and it's a brain discovery. It's showing that disease has its origin in the brain, and each organ ailment is actually a consequence of a brain directed um, process going on in the body. And you can map it out with a CT scan. You can see these brain formations, and you'd
you
be able to predict what's going on in the body. And it completely redefines our understanding of what is the disease, what is it, where does it come from, what causes it, and talk about a paradigm shift. And but it explains, all the diseases except for diseases caused by like poisoning or starvation or injury. You know, so it's like a major paradigm shift. It clarifies the situation greatly, and it's a discovery. It's a discovery of the brain and showing the true origin of where the diseases come from, what they are. They're not in and of themselves pathogenic processes caused by some kind of like infectious agent or genetic breakdown or malfunction of nature. No, they're the natural predictable consequences of these brain organ processes, which can be interpreted as brain organ adaptation processes that respond to acute, unexpected stresses we experience in life. So, in this way, it ties, the conscious psychological component of biology to the brain organ manifestations of biology into this one whole. And it's a completely, you know, empirical science insofar as you can identify these conflict shock stresses imprinting the brain. So you can identify them in the brain on a CT scan. And you can know that that imprint correlates to a specific organ change at the cellular level. And it's all in response to this stress that you were unexpectedly faced with in life. And then further on, once that stress resolves, okay, once you overcome that stress, thanks to your own efforts, but also perhaps thanks to this biological program of adaptation, once you overcome the stress, the imprint that was in the brain turns into edema. So you can see that on the CT scan. There's an edematous area in the brain, and simultaneously, the organ undergoes a restorative healing phase where it reverses the previous adaptation. And that phase of healing or restoration comes with the majority of common symptoms where sinus, colds, or there's so many that's where these quote unquote illnesses really begin, is during the healing phase, when the body tries to recover and restore itself after this stress adaptation response. So it's like here you have a map to understand what disease is, when it comes in the body, according to which organ that is affected. I call it it's the first science of medicine, because prior to this, we've been shooting in the dark, listing and blaming hundreds of quote unquote factors that we've attributed to the cause of disease. And so you have like hundreds of hypotheses for what causes disease. And in the majority of cases, it's always like some evil malignant entity infected you. And so don't eat this, don't go out in the sun because the sun causes cancer. Or like, hopefully you got good genetics because the genes break down and cause disease. And so you just have one after the other. And you have medicine operating on dozens of these hypotheses, attacking the body that is demonstrating these disease processes. But now I would say we have the first scientific explanation of disease phenomenon, right? And it's like, to put that into perspective, when you have a science of the phenomenon, you no longer have the fear, panic, superstitions that come along with that, And so, like, right now, we're living in an age of total fear and superstition relative to disease, cancer being a big one, but pretty much any disease. It's just this superstitious, follow these commandments or else you're going to be condemned to disease. And it's just, everybody's like, terrified because we're living in an age of superstition relative to this phenomenon of nature, of biology. And once this science kind of gets recognized, then you can imagine how this fear, panic, and superstition just sort of melts away under this predictive framework that explains what's happening and gives us foresight so that we can be like, anticipatory of the symptoms. And so much is explained by this new paradigm. It's like, and so much of medicine will like have to evolve and change. First and foremost, like bedside manner of doctors, because when you understand that it's the psyche getting shocked that leads to a biological program of adaptation in an organ, and the consequence of that is disease, whether it's immediate or down the line. You can understand now that doctors giving these prognoses and these labels and these diagnoses, you have cancer, get your affairs in order, you're going to die. Okay, that's what doctors do. And that's a major traumatic shock to the psyche. Okay, they don't realize it, but that is what is causing quote unquote metastasis of the primary disease that they've observed. So they observe the primary disease, they give the news to their patient. The patient gets shocked, and that launches an additional organ adaptation from the brain, visible on a CT scan. And so it's really like doctors need to like hold the fuck up, stop scaring the shit out of your patients, and reconsider biology, reapproach biology on the basis of these discoveries that show you what exactly is going on with disease and how to like work in like agreement with biology, like towards the purposes that biology is expressing. And it's really ultimately about resolving these fundamental conflicts that are landing and situating in the brain, So it's just not to say that all of drugs and medicine will go out the window. You'll need restorative interventional care, like medicine is so great at helping somebody who has like a major fracture or a terrible gun wound injury or something. Like they're awesome at that. And the technology that exists are like really cool. Everybody appreciates medicine for its like acute interventionist care in like these extreme cases. But when it comes to organic diseases like cancer or like quote unquote viral diseases, which have their explanation in the brain now, they are terrible. They have the worst track record. and the procedures that they apply are literally chemo, like poison the body to death to try to overcome this organic process called disease. So they have a terrible track record, and once you understand what the body wants, then you can improve your success rate tremendously. And so there's a bright future in medicine once people like and doctors and practitioners like just learn this new paradigm of medicine, which I find is so scarcely known, even among groups like this where you have all the truths coming out, and you know really like like the name of this Discord server, like awakenings. It's even we're still at the beginning stages of awakening to this new science of biology, but I'm all for it. I don't know if I'm like even talking into this Discord server or if I've gotten booted or something. Maybe I'm just monologuing.
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
It's not like you're saying something new here, right? Like I've heard this before, the tie-in between mental and physiological responses. We heard that before now, but now you're saying that somehow they can do something to the brain reading, and you're saying they can predetermine these diseases. Am I hearing you right?
Yes, to a large degree, yes, because you have a physical imprint in the brain that results from these psychosomatic shocks or these conflict shocks that occur in life, and it imprints in the brain, and that imprint indicates that a specific organ. So the brain is composed of like dozens and dozens of brain relays corresponding to the various organs of the body. And so when an imprint is over top one relay, you know that that corresponding organ is undergoing an adaptation process. And it has a biological meaning specifically relative to the kind of conflict shock you experienced in life. So it's not just a general stress, anything goes. It's actually a specific kind of stress, a specific kind of conflict that results in this specific organ response, okay? And in about like 40% of cases, the adaptation in the organ goes unnoticed. There's no symptoms of pain or inflammation. And then in 60% of cases, so the alternative is that when that process of adaptation comes to an end, meaning the conflict or stress in life is resolved, that's when you first experience symptoms. What the symptoms actually are, the inflammatory symptoms, they are organic restoration processes where the tissues that had adapted are now reverting back to their original form, and healing, essentially. So the adaptation needs to go into a healing phase after the conflict is over, after that biological adaptation process is no longer needed. Okay, so the majority of quote unquote diseases and symptoms are actually healing phase symptoms as a part of like a restorative process. But this is also visible in the brain. The brain relay that previously had an imprint goes into an edema, so you can see the edema on the brain. So with that information, you can predict diseases ahead of time. You can anticipate diseases before they occur.
Hey, give them an example, like say for instance, like the heart. If the heart gets enlarged, or I wouldn't say heart attack, but I'd say more like clogged arteries. Let's say not something bacteria, but like something similar to a virus. Let's just say.
Yeah, sure. One example I like to use, like I could go into the heart, but one example I really like to use is the lungs. And so there's two parts of there's lots, but there's two, there's the alveoli cells of the lungs, and then there's the bronchial tubes which carry air to the lungs. So regarding the alveoli sacs of the lungs, this is an organ of the body. Its relay is in the brainstem, okay? And the conflict shock, which leads to a biological program affecting the alveoli sacs in the lungs is a death fright, what is called a death fright conflict. And an example of this is if you're like held up at gunpoint, or if a doctor tells you, you know, diagnoses you with cancer. Let's say it's a cancer in the knee or something, or in like, I don't know, somewhere else. And they say, you have cancer and we don't think you have a good prognosis. That is a common death fright conflict, okay? And there's innumerable, light situations that could constitute a death fright conflict, an unexpected situation that makes you fear for your life. So what happens? War. War is another common cause for death frights. People bombs dropping, friends going off and dying, and etc. So what happens is the brain directs an organ specific response, and it starts to literally grow and multiply cells in the alveoli sacs. And this serves actually a biological purpose. So the alveoli sacs are where you transfer oxygen from the lungs into the bloodstream. And as the alveoli sacs grow and expand with these additional cells, there's like greater surface area and a greater ability for the oxygen to transfer into the blood. This is a biologically meaningful response to enhance function to survive the conflict shock of a death fright. All right. And in war, that would make perfect sense, So this goes on practically asymptomatically in the majority of cases for as long as as long as you're faced with the conflict. And then when war is declared over, all right, like the 1918 flu, all right, or when the altercation with the person with the gun is over, or as soon as you resolve the problem mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically, that's when the body turns off that program and begins a process of restoration. What happens here is tubercular bacteria in the body are initiated and turned on by the nervous system to begin to break down those previously added cells. So bacteria, microorganisms, they're not attacking the body aimlessly or like in this sort of like gone rogue pathogenic style. No, they're actually serving a specific purpose to break down these added tissue cells in the alveoli cells of the lungs. And this is when the symptoms really first become pronounced in the individual after the conflict is resolved. And then they call it tuberculosis, right? And you're coughing up phlegm, sometimes blood, and you're losing a lot of protein because it takes a lot of energy for this process to unfold. So if you're not eating or if you're starving, it could be a bad situation. And it depends on the degree of cellular alteration that occurred during the conflict, which means how long did it last and how intense was it. And if you go back to World War I, that's a long, intense fucking conflict that probably affected millions of people. Everybody was afraid for their life. That was a really unexpected war, by the way. And so after that problem's over, tubercular bacteria, if you have tubercular bacteria, by the way, will become initiated to start to restore and reverse the previous adaptation. And that comes with consequences, right? That's a process of healing. And when you're shocked with fear from the symptoms, or if your doctor says, this is terrible, you don't have a good chance, and you're in this now, when you're in this healing phase, and then you're stricken with panic, and you're now like sick to your stomach, and you're like fight or flight while you're trying to heal, it's a terrible combination. So that's why doctors need to like wake up to this information so that they don't scare their patients.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, right? We understand the effects of stress to the body, and then one thing could lead to the other. Granted, agreed. What I'm trying to understand is how are you like trying to say this is something new, and how can we somehow predict these things by a brain scan? I fail to see the. Maybe
Okay,
I'm slow, but I fail to see the connection.
It's a good question. Let me go back to that example. So let's say you have somebody in the modern day and you take a brain scan and you look at the brain stem and you see a concentric ring formation. That's what it looks like over top the brain relay that governs alveoli cell function. and it's a crystal clear ring, okay, or a spherical formation in truth, but you'll see it as a concentric ring formation. If you see that in the person's brain CT scan over top this specific relay, you know that there's cells multiplying and growing in their alveoli sacs.
Wait,
All
how
right.
do you identify a specific, what you're calling a relay or synapse? How are you identifying that specific synapse?
It's not a synapse. It's a area of the brain that controls organic function. So you have the brainstem, you have the cerebral medulla, you have the cerebellum, and then you have the cortex, the outer part of the brain. And within these layers, you have various relays of various sizes too, that are each responsible for a
How do
specific
they
organ.
function then? I mean, we understand that nerve conduction and communication is through chemicals and synapses. I mean, you're talking about it like it's some sort of electrical switch that closes and makes a contact.
Yeah, it's more than that. Yeah, it's something. It's interesting. It's a spherical. I would say because it shows up on a magnetic computer tomography scan. It's some kind of magnetic spherical formation that exists over top this specific part of the brain, and this formation changes the brain. And in fact, the formation, this spherical formation, also is seen in the corresponding organ as well. You can take a CT scan of, let's say, a joint or the heart or whichever organ that's affected, and you can find these concentric ring magnetic formations in the organ as well. In fact, one example is if you've ever gotten a bullseye, the concentric ring bullseye, often from a deer tick, and they call that Lyme's disease, right? That bullseye effect is the organ level manifestation of this concentric ring thing that you'll find in the brain. In any case, you have this formation in the brain, the formation in the organ, and what it's doing is it's coordinating a biological adaptation at the cellular level in the specific organ. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's, brain body correlations go back a century or more,
We
right?
get
This
that,
part of
bro.
it. Okay.
Bro, it's the predictability thing that you're
Okay.
trying to. I don't get that.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't see that anyway. You're not making your case here.
Okay. Well, I was responding to the other guy who kind of jutted in. I was going to respond to that directly. So
Oh,
you
my
you
bad.
see,
My bad.
yeah. So you see this concentric ring in the brainstem, which governs the alveoli cells. Okay, and if it is there, if you can see it at the brain level, then you know that the alveoli cells are adding and multiplying cells. Okay, that's knowledge. Then you will know that the person is currently active with a quote unquote death fright conflict in life. Something happened in their life which led to this brain formation, which leads to this organ cellular growth. Then you also know that as soon as they resolve that conflict in life, whatever it might be for that individual, the cells will reverse that program and start to undergo an inflammatory restoration phase known as tuberculosis or lung cancer or disease, where you're coughing up. What you're doing is you're coughing up the cells that are being broken down. That's like the presentation of that disease. You can predict that by knowing that this spherical formation exists in the brain. You know that the individual is conflict active with a conflict in life, and that as soon as he resolves that conflict, in this case, you'll get symptoms in that specific organ of the body. So you
I
can
have a
now,
question. I have a question. Do
yeah,
all patients with the tuberculosis show this formation in their brain?
yep. That's why it's a new science of biology. That's why it's a major discovery.
Okay, got
It's
you, got
called,
you, got you.
yeah. There,
Another question.
yeah.
Is it possible? First of all, how do you know that? Um, like, how do you know? Did you do tests where you check the brain first before they have tuberculosis, or is every person you check has tuberculosis and then you check their brain and you see that thing there? Because really, I don't see the correlation. I don't see how you can be certain of this.
Well, the first time this was discovered, it was in 1980 or 81. And the guy who discovered it, his name is Dr. Hammer, or Reich Gerd Hammer. And so it began with his initial discovery of his own situation. He had a testicular cancer, and it was after he experienced the death of his son. You know, his son was shot and killed, and so he said there must be a correlation here, which anybody nowadays would be able to say, yeah, that makes sense if there's a correlation. But he was an oncologist. He worked in a cancer clinic, and so he went to every patient that had testicular cancer in his clinic, and he asked them, and he started to investigate. I wonder, did you experience some very stressful event, maybe something along the lines of like losing a loved one or losing an offspring? And to his astonishment, they all had these stressful major life conflicts. Okay.
Everyone's experienced that though. I mean,
Right.
especially once you've like aged to the age of being an adult man who would get testicular cancer, you're gonna have a few deaths in your life by that point.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
say everybody will experience that a death. Doesn't mean everyone's going to get tuberculosis. Again, I fail to see a connection.
Or testicular cancer. Yeah, right. Not everybody is going to experience a given trauma in life as a trauma, or as a trauma that affects that specific organ of the body. So it's highly individual. Okay, but the major connection that he found was this because like the CT scanner, that device was invented like 7 years prior, like 1973, I think, or maybe a little bit earlier, 10 years earlier. But in any case, it was a pretty new medical diagnostic tool. And so he started to wonder, okay, I wonder if all these cases that are presenting with cancer after a traumatic shock are demonstrating something in the brain. And so he started to look, and he did find these formations in the brain. And that's what began his work. And so he started to make all these connections, brain science connecting to the organ, and then translating these formations into understanding what's the conflict shock in life that leads to this formation in the brain.
That makes sense, like 100%, right? The trauma causing that, but I still can't see like how you can like do a brain scan and predict something like, or those rings that you say, are they there before the tuberculosis? Before, I mean, it's like
okay, so
quite,
yeah, it's a so I use that example of the lung tuberculosis. Tuberculosis comes after the conflict is resolved, and the tubercular bacteria start to break down the multiplied tissue in the lungs that had multiplied as a result of this brain organ program of adaptation. Okay, so first thing that happens is the conflict shock happens. Second thing that happens is the psyche interprets the nature of the conflict shock. Okay, and then the third thing that happens is it lands in a specific part of the brain, which governs a specific organ to adapt. And what I was saying is that in a majority of cases, this adaptation goes asymptomatic. You don't really even know it's happening. And then when the conflict resolves, the next thing to happen is the organ undergoes an inflammatory restoration process called the healing phase. And simultaneous to that healing phase, the brain, where there was that imprint, undergoes edema. So you find edema where there was once that imprint. So this is just like, these are key points of intel that when you put them onto a map for any individual, you can have a tremendous predictive power, provided that you know what's going on in the brain. And also knowing that this is the mechanism behind which disease manifests, or the phenomenon of disease. Now you know the causative mechanism. So it's in the psyche, it's in these conflict shocks. So that also gives you a tremendous upper hand in understanding, well, am I at risk for this kind of disease? Well, let's think about it. Did you suffer this kind of conflict shock in life? You could take a brain CT scan and know for sure if the body is adapting with that specific organ. And that would give you information to know that, okay, I might experience inflammatory disease symptoms, quote unquote. because you now know the process. I don't know if you're following me, but it's like a whole blueprint for understanding this phenomenon, biological phenomenon, and the disease manifestation.
I hear you, bro. I'm not like against it, you know.
No,
I'm just
yeah, sure.
yeah, I'm just trying to understand it, and like I see the benefits, and like I'm sure everybody thought of, like, people knew, like, stress causes this, and like you know, the fight or flight response when you're about to get into a fight, you get a hit of adrenaline, right? How that
Definitely.
you feel it in you. I mean, everybody has experienced that, right?
Mhm.
And people in worse situations, and right, they get the 1,000 mile stare, and we know all these things, how chemicals can affect you, but this predictive thing in the brain, I mean, I'm trying to see it, but I don't get it. Maybe, like you're saying, maybe one thing I see, like somebody did get stress and thought nothing of it, and maybe it made an imprint in their brain, and through this process, like, you just do a routine scan and the doctor says, oh, wait a minute, I see a ring there, or maybe that, but besides that, I don't see no predictive. Yeah.
Hey, I
Well,
got a
it's just
question for you, man, if you don't
yeah,
mind.
sure. Go ahead.
Um, you said like one of these traumatic experiences is gonna happen, of course, in someone's life, and then you said, and that's going to land somewhere in the brain. Were you saying that's at random, or do like specific sort of types of situations affect particular parts of the brain?
Yeah, no, it's specific to the type of situation. Um,
How do you
and so,
classify different like types of situations?
yeah, exactly, with thousands of people. So what you end up having to do is you see a concentric ring formation over top a specific organ relay, and you know that it's governing a change in the body. And then you have to ask, well, what did that person experience? What was the shock that landed in the brain in that specific organ? And so you find out, oh, this person experienced this kind of conflict in life. And you build it from there. So it has to apply to every single person. Otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily call it a science. I would say it's an interesting discovery with a
Sure.
speculation about the
Give me
nature of these conflicts. So yeah,
Give
yeah,
give me a couple situations that don't land in the same part of the brain or with the same
yeah,
organ.
yeah. Okay, so we were talking about the alveoli cells. That's a death fright, and the purpose is to enhance oxygenation in the blood through these cell growths. Let's look at now the bronchial tubes, completely different organ of the body.
I thought death was testicles.
No. That's a profound loss. You experienced a profound
That's the
loss.
same. That's the same thing as a death.
No. A death fright is a personal death fright. You are afraid for your life. You're thinking your life is in threat. Like a death fright, like somebody holding
Oh,
you gunpoint.
oh, I thought you said that the guys with the testicle cancer like all lost their sons or their wife.
Yes, that's a different. That's a think of that scenario. You're not afraid for your life in that instance. You lost your son. It's a
Uh-huh.
completely different kind of experience. You're not afraid that you're going to die. You're afraid your son is dead. Or
Okay,
you're afraid, your
and you're
son.
saying the
So that
lungs are you're afraid for your own life is where the
that's
lungs come into play, you're saying?
that's right. It's a yeah.
Okay, I
Yeah.
got you
An
now.
acute. Yeah, exactly.
All right, what's another
And then
one?
so
Give
the
me a heart
bronchial.
one, if you know. Like,
Okay.
what's a heart one
All right. So there's multiple
or a
parts of the
diaphragm?
heart. Okay, the diaphragm is different. I could go to the heart. I know that
Whatever,
better. And the heart
whatever you
is
want.
actually tied to the diaphragm. So it
Hey,
depends on what part of the heart.
can I respond to you real quick? Because this guy's just going to talk over me. But why? It's kind of like helpful to understand how they came to this process and how the doctor actually did this is because he noticed reoccurring patterns with all of his patients. So he was
I
just a
heard that.
regular doctor. Oh, you heard that already?
Yeah, yeah. He went on and like surveyed all sorts of different people with different illnesses, and yeah,
No,
he went to.
no, that's not what happened, dude. Like He
But didn't
noticed like
didn't he go to
eh,
the ball cancer clinic and interview
Well,
all of them? And then he went to the heart attack, section of the hospital and
well
interviewed all of
well
them. And
he also went to his patients too.
sure,
yeah, that
it's
right,
all
because
part
he
of
was an
it's all part of a
yeah,
collective effort. I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I would agree with your assessment. He took a bunch of people that had the same condition, and he found the common thread in all of them. Right.
Right.
And that's a feat in and of itself. The discovery on its own stands as this remarkable advance in science, which is the brain discovery that these diseases are tied to this brain manifestation that you can see in a CT scan. So, like that alone, if you just limited it to that, that's like huge. But
Do you
I
do you remember the
making these
archetype of
connections,
do
yeah,
you remember the archetype of trauma associated with the heart or the diaphragm or some
yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
organ?
So the heart, you have the myocardium, which is like the muscle, and then you have the ventricle, you have the coronary veins, and you have the coronary arteries. That's another part of the heart, and
Right.
these two parts respond with different kinds of conflicts. So changes to the coronary arteries will respond to the conflict of a territorial loss. Okay, so in nature, think of this as like a stag or a deer. All right, he has his territory, he has his clan, and I don't know what you would call it. And a younger buck kicks him out of the territory. All right, imagine that territorial
Sure.
loss. What ends up happening? So what goes on from there is the brain relay. In this case, for us, it's located in the cerebral cortex, the outer part of the brain. But regardless, an imprint lands there, governing an adaptation in the coronary vessels, the arteries, and this adaptation is an ulceration of the internal intima of the vessels. And what that does is it opens up the vessels, widens the lumen so that greater blood flow can flow through the body. And
Sure.
what that does for the stag in nature is it actually improves his capacity to win back his territory. He's like more capable to fight off the younger buck, right? So
Okay.
that's the conflict active phase, and it actually corresponds in this case to symptoms in the body. You would experience symptoms during this conflict active phase. And then following the conflict resolution, you either find a new territory or you kick the individual out of your territory, whatever it was that made you feel like you lost your territory. That resolves, and then the body has to undergo a repair phase where that intima, or that lumen of the vessel, is replenished. Plaque, okay, plaque is part of this process of replenishing um, the vessels. All right,
Can I ask
and
you a question?
yep.
Is it a common theme that whenever there's one of these adaptations to trauma, that like the overall theme of how the organ responds is usually just like swelling up, like getting enlarged or
Yeah,
something?
inflammation,
No,
right?
there's two, Fundy. There's actually two. There's uh
Yeah. Okay.
can you tell me about the two? There's growing
Yeah,
more
sure.
cells or yeah.
Wait. Two. I thought you were going to talk two phases. So the healing phase, or the post conflict phase. So after the conflict is resolved, there's a healing phase or a restoration phase, and this is an inflammatory phase in practically all the cases, and that means inflammation, that means swelling to a degree. Healing happens in a fluid environment. All right. So, yeah,
Mm.
that's a very common post conflict presentation in the various organs of the body, whichever is affected. The
Is there
first phase,
always is there always swelling in the adaptate, like the part before inflammation?
no,
Like
no, 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 no,
no.
no, not that. Well,
So
okay, let me tell you this.
what
There's,
changes about
I
the
shouldn't have said
organ
that. I shouldn't have
at
said
first?
that. I
Then
shouldn't have said that.
okay.
I'm sorry, what? What'd you say? What'd you ask?
I said if the like the swelling and the inflammation is like returning back to its previous state after it adjusted itself to deal with whatever situation,
Right.
What kind of changes occur in that? Like, what kind of physical changes happen when
Right.
the sort of adaptation is occurring?
Yeah. Okay. So there's three categories of change. The first is cell ulceration. So, like I described in the vessels of the heart, you have ulceration, a degradation of the cells, usually to open up the lumen or to increase greater space. In the endocrine glands, it's to allow the juices to secrete into the bloodstream easier. Okay. And then the second category of adaptation is cell multiplication, right? So that's the common classic cancer picture where you have cell multiplication. In the intestines, you get cauliflower shaped cell
But
multiplication or
those first two sound like opposites: degradation and multiplication.
yeah, no, these are two different kinds of responses depending
Oh,
on the
it's one or the
organ.
other.
It's
Okay,
one
so
or
it's
the
one or
other.
the
Yeah, yeah,
other.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and
my
it
bad.
depends. Yeah. It depends on the organ, or more specifically, the germ layer, which corresponds to the layer in the brain. So, I mean, it's a
This
huge
is
science.
very
It's
interesting, but you still haven't shown like the question I asked you before, the correlation. How you, like, for example, uh, all people that were fighting in World War I in the trenches, the soldiers, right? They all experienced the same trauma, right?
no.
Fear,
That's
fear
not
of
correct.
death.
They didn't
What?
necessarily all. They didn't necessarily all experience a death fright. It depends on the individual's psyche and how they perceive stress. And so somebody might have experienced a death fright that affects the alveoli cells. Another person might have experienced a different kind of tonality to the stress, which would affect a completely different organ of the body. And then a third person would be in his element, and he'd be like, "Fuck that! I'm not stressed out. This is where I'm supposed to be," right? And so it's completely specific to the individual and how their psyche perceives life. But anyways,
So
in
there's no
general, yeah.
correlation then. There's no correlation. You just said it yourself. You can't
Well,
correlate a certain stress to a certain type of body injury.
Well, you can say that if an individual does experience a death fright conflict, okay, so you as an individual, you're capable of experiencing a death fright conflict. It's just the question is, will you experience this situation as a death fright?
Well,
That's
that's
remains
why.
to be seen.
Well,
That
that's why
remains
I
to be seen.
gave. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go for it.
That's why I gave you a specific example. You're going to tell me that the majority of the people in the foxhole didn't have a fear of life? I'm not saying all of them. Sure, you have your gun ho guys that
Right.
reassign after their tour, and you have these mental cases, right? Other guys
Yeah,
are trying to get out, but you're going to tell me the majority of the people in the foxhole didn't experience the
I
fright?
would no. Speaking of
He
statistics and
didn't say that at
majority,
all, man.
I
He
would
really
say
didn't
in the
say that.
but
I
in
wasn't
Sorry,
speaking
talking
of
go
to
ahead.
you, Andrea.
statistics,
I wasn't talking to you.
speaking
Okay.
of statistics and majorities, I would actually say, yeah, there would be a majority of people who experienced a quote death fright during World War One, and that's why you have the quote 1918 epidemic. All right, after the war ends, the conflict is over, and you have millions of people around the world experiencing coughing and hacking up blood and sputum.
Okay, so you're saying now there is a correlation. The 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 heavy anxiety and death fear caused in World War I, you're saying now led to what, the flu? Is that what
Yeah,
you're alluding
the
to?
tubercular. Yeah. The Spanish flu or the 1918 flu really, I think, affected more the bronchioles, but it's a similar kind of conflict, nuanced and different. But that which affects the bronchial tubes is a territorial fear
So,
of aggression. So,
so if that's the case, why is it so contagious?
well, that's the whole
Excellent
contention. That
question. Now,
wait. Let me answer this. That's the whole contention that when we went down that path, the conversation ended, and we had to change something. So whether it's contagious or not, that's up for every individual to kind of figure out for themselves. I wish I could debate that point with more freedom.
I don't know. I don't mean to be antagonistic, but I still fail to see any correlation between this certain kind of stress and this certain kind of illness.
Well, the way I kind of describe it to people is, you have to appreciate this is like a frontier in mind body science. All right, it is interesting. It's almost like you're able to say that we can now categorize psychological, the experiential side of reality. You're able to categorize it according to these brain formations and these conflict shocks that impact in the brain. So you could now describe, like, what is a fear death or like a death fright? What is that? How would you define that objectively? Okay. Because otherwise you have just subjective interpretation of whatever that means for the individual. But now we can kind of say, in an objective sense, a death fright is that which impacts the brain relay in the brainstem controlling alveoli function. It's like a biological definition of an experience in human life. So I don't know if you follow that, but that's a major horizon in how I would understand or science.
If
Like
it's
the
if
future.
it's true, if it's true that everything you hold is really profound. I can tell like none of us are fully sold on the idea, but
Yeah.
I want to say something to Montreal if you don't mind. I just think I may be picking up on not that I'm any more believing in his words than you are, but I think I might be able to answer your questions from the way I'm understanding him if you or want to hear.
Yeah, of course, for sure, bro. Go ahead. Yeah.
So, so first off, it isn't about the actual event that is so key. It's really about how we all know there's different types of traumatic events that have the possibility of being traumatic. Although, like you might have had a breakup with a girlfriend that it was just like, we grew apart. Yeah, we broke up. That was the specific kind of event, like a breakup with a girlfriend. But then there was times where it hit really hard, and there's times where you just kind of like didn't really get affected too much by it emotionally. It wasn't such a shock, even though it was the same archetype of like type of event. But one of those experiences, like your first breakup versus your third, right? It was more traumatic. And so then if if it is to some level of trauma, and maybe you're like really fucking heartbroken for like the next like 3 weeks. I think what he's saying is that there's going to be some sort of response of a particular organ, and um, you're also going to be able to take a CT scan and find that there's some sort of energetic ring or something in a particular in your medulla oblongata, which is somehow related to your liver, and because you took this breakup really hard, you're gonna be able to see the medulla oblongata energy sphere before your liver starts failing. And if you notice it on the brain scan, then maybe you can take preventative measures to make sure your liver doesn't kill itself.
I don't doubt that, and I got that part for sure. But
That's
the
what I
part
got
that
so
I'm
far.
questioning, yeah, no, and that would be great if that's the case, right?
Yeah, right.
And I even said that I see that as one of the benefits. If you experience a trauma but you feel fine, you go and you get your head scanned, and if this is the case and you see a ring, well, you can take preventative measures, right?
Exactly.
That's
Right.
not,
We're on the
yeah,
same page totally.
yeah, but that's not the part I question.
Oh,
The part I
okay.
question is the predictability part. He's
Well,
saying that
okay, go ahead.
what I think he's saying is that you can scan a brain before any traumatic event, or maybe before. I'm not sure if that's what he means, but You can scan a brain prior to any problems or having any tuberculosis or anything, and then say, "Oh, I see this ring here. Well, you know, something is wrong." Now he thinks what that means to him is a traumatic event happened, not that it happened because of biological or chemical, or you understand what I'm saying? This
Oh,
is
that's a good
yeah.
point. Okay, that's a good point. That's something that I've had to debate on other forums. What's the cause of the hammerhead? Okay, it's called a hammerhead. You call it a hammer foci. It's a concentric ring formation in the brain, really a sphere. It's not an artifact, which you'll find on Wikipedia. There's 3 ways to determine that it's not an artifact. It's a real formation in the brain. But the question is, what causes it? Some people would like to say, well, a virus could cause it, right? If the virus is infected the organ, and then there's a mirror effect on the brain, and you're just, misconstruing that. Or maybe toxins cause this hammerhead in the brain. And this is the way you can demonstrate that the cause of the hammerhead in the brain is indeed a conflict shock, okay? Because the hammerhead doesn't go away. It doesn't turn into edema unless you resolve that specific conflict
What does that word
in
mean?
life.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
How do you know?
What's
Sorry.
edema though? But
Yeah.
what's edema?
Okay,
It's
let's do that.
water, watery fluid.
Okay, all
It
you
presents.
Montreal.
Okay, now how do you know? I forgot what I was going to say. How do you know the cause of what you said is you're relating it to that, right? But how do you know?
because it appears in the brain and then it disappears in the brain. It turns into watery fluid edema.
Yeah,
So
but
you
how
have
do
to
you know
ask,
what the trauma was? How do you know
right?
what it was?
That's been demonstrated over decades of researching individual cases and finding the pattern among hundreds and thousands of people with the
So
same
you
organ
gotta
affliction.
trust you gotta trust in the surveys that this guy or his students or whoever belongs to this group, right? That you gotta trust in the surveying that they did and interviews
Good.
and stuff like that.
That's fair, but you can say it's established and scientifically firm that it is
Sure.
trauma that causes the imprint, and that it's not toxins or virus or whatever else you want to attribute it to.
I
So
don't
the
Okay,
think
but
you
question
made
is,
your case for that.
but
I don't.
can you force it though? Can you force it? So I know this is dark, and I know there's a better way to do it. But like, say I go into the natal section of a hospital and I kill a mother gives birth and then I kill her baby in front of her own eyes. Are you going to be able to scan a certain part of her brain and find like that, like immediate like detection, like boom, like I forced that like brain
well,
reaction.
yeah, there was an article on Dr. McCullough. I don't
There's
know if
better
you
ways
know.
to do it than that though. I'm just saying.
Yeah, there was an article on McCullough's site, Dr. something McCullough, since taken down, by the way. But he referenced a study where doctors, they did it to a dog. You see, because this is animal, it applies to animals as well. And what they did was they traumatized the dog, and then took a brain CT scan and found the concentric ring in his brain. All right, at post trauma. All right, but Hammer was a completely different point of view. He says, no, you do not traumatize. There should be no animal studies causing trauma to try to ascertain scientific, discoveries or whatever. So he would have never condoned that or done it himself. But yeah, I believe it had been done. There was a study, and it was actually posted on Mercola's site prior to 2019 or 2020. But yeah, that's one way to do it. That's one way to prove that trauma does lead to these imprints in the brain. Another
And
way to do it is
that's
just,
been done. That really has been done though.
yeah, I believe that dog study really had been done. But you can ascertain and demonstrate it. You don't need to
Oh,
do a direct
but
cause and effect study.
what do you do though? Do you like pet a dog, and raise it in a good household, and then one day you steal its food from out from under its nose and you kick it in the side, and then you measure its brain? Like
Yeah,
what do you
or
even
abandon it.
do?
I think that might be what they did. They abandoned it. and
They just
you know,
spent a lot of time with a dog and then just left it alone for a week and then measured its brain.
yeah,
That's so sad, but that is kind
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah. It's horrible.
And it's
It's
yeah.
also
But
very
unnecessary.
speculative, highly, highly speculative.
Well, whether that caused the formation to form in the brain. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
there is a little disconnect, although, I mean, the more times you do it, God forbid, but the more times you do it with different dogs, right, the more reliable the data gets. I just hate the idea of even doing that, but that is how science works, to a degree.
Were they feeding? Were they feeding the dog during this experiment? Were
I
they
don't
giving
know
it
exactly.
water?
Yeah, I don't know exactly the details of that experiment, that animal trauma experiment.
Was it bitten
Yeah,
by a tick while it was abandoned? Did a tick bite it?
well, you could really rule out bacteria as being the cause of the hammerherd because of what I was trying to say, which is that the hammerherd turns into edema not randomly, not when you go on to a nutritional program, or not when you detoxify the body, but when you resolve the conflict. That's when the hammerherd turns into edema, and that then corresponds to the shift in the organ into an inflammatory state, and and so it can be verified on multiple levels. There's lots of facts that you can look at to verify that it was a trauma that impacted the brain, and then it was the resolution of that trauma which then led to that imprint to dissolve into edema.
Let me put it this
Um,
way. Let me put it this way. My girlfriend breaks up with me, and all of a sudden, my liver and my medulla oblongata are like swollen, and I got these like energy spheres in them. Then my girlfriend says, "Hey, I'm so sorry I broke up with you. Let's get back together and live happily ever after." And all of a sudden, both of those things disappear because it's
well,
resolved, and she came back to you.
the swelling would actually come after the resolution, and it probably
Right,
wouldn't be your liver.
the edema begins right as soon as she says, "Let's get back together."
Yes. Or you
You
find a
heard it
new
here.
girlfriend.
Yeah, there you heard it here in Montreal. I think that
I'm familiar
I'm
with the
trying to be
medulla.
diplomatic. I'm trying my best. I'm trying.
Yes, you are. Yeah, I hear you, Essie. I'm familiar with the medulla, but the
This
medulla oblongata, I'm not familiar with
well,
that part of the brain.
that's just a small part of the brain. There's three layers to the brain. There's the brainstem right above the spine. There's the cerebellum at the back. There's the cerebral medulla or white matter in the middle of the brain, and then there's the cerebral cortex that surrounds the brain. So there's three levels, and these correspond to the three germ layers in the body: the endoderm, which composes the alimentary canal or the digestive system generally. Um, the cerebral medulla corresponds to the musculoskeletal system, and the ectoderm corresponds to the outer skin and um, the skin that layers inside some organs of the body, like the ductal passageways of various organs, squamous epithelium. That all corresponds to the ectoderm of the brain. So the three germ layers correspond to these three layers in the brain, and any one of them are susceptible to receiving, well, because they each have various brain relays that govern various different organs of the body, and depending on the nature of the conflict, that's what will determine which relay is affected, which brain layer, which embryological germ layer, and which organ is affected.
Look, it's
is there
obvious.
any
It's obvious. You know your stuff. Like your.
totally.
You know. Yeah, it's totally obvious. Way more than me, right? And respect for that. But you see, the thing is here. What you're failing to do is you're failing to show a cause and effect. Like
Well,
what you're
yes, but
saying. Yeah.
I would fail to show a classical cause and effect with respect to, like, let's say I couldn't prove that stress in a general sense causes the sympathetic flight or fight response. How would I prove that? What's the independent variable which I could take out and say, look, this causes the sympathetic fight or flight response? It's just stress
Adrenaline.
is,
Adrenaline.
well, that's the biological response, but what causes it?
he said the sympathetic, right, which is like that, like psychophysical connection, which can't be really measured because it deals with your interpretation of how you personally like handle events in your life, and that's
Right.
different for every individual.
No,
Right.
but
So it's
we
not
can
a
explain the
classical cause
fighter.
and effect. Yeah.
I was going to say we can explain the fight or flight thing. Somebody
Right.
comes
I
up
would
to you,
agree.
hey man, grabs you, I'm gonna beat
Oh, we
the
agree.
crap out of you. You feel it, you start trembling, right? Now, if anybody's ever been in a street fight, you feel that adrenaline rushing, right? So you know the fear of you getting your ass whooped caused the adrenaline, right?
Yeah,
And
but
now that's
I
just
there's
the
a
would
way it
difference.
is
I would
now.
agree. I would
Yeah.
agree
But
that, but that,
I
you're
can,
talking about fear. That's a
yeah,
subjective
yeah.
experience, right?
But check
I
this
don't
out. Check
know.
this out. I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Um, Me and my girlfriend can watch a movie, and I watch the dude get his head cut off and his fucking, dick shoved down his throat hole, right? And it's like, it doesn't affect me emotionally. I just say, oh, that's crazy, right? But my girlfriend, she goes, "Ah, oh my God," and she looks away. So people are going to have different like psychophysical responses to the same stimuli.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
agreed.
problem.
Yeah, of course.
Right. So what's the independent variable there that you can manipulate and demonstrate causes the biological response? You just
and
say it's fear, and then, but
you
that's
can't.
not right.
I'm just
It's
saying you can't like scientifically investigate like why she reacts in her way and I react in my way. We're just different people.
yeah.
Yeah, but I don't
So
believe that's the issue what we're talking about.
it is
Well,
though, because
it
people are going
kind
to
of
go
is.
to
Yeah.
war. People, yeah, that is the point. People are going to go to war, see their best friend shot in the head by a sniper right next to them, and some of them are going to be like me watching the movie and say, "Oh, big deal, guy got his head cut off" or whatever. Versus the person next to me who is extremely reactive to just seeing this visual presentation. Like everyone's going to handle the same situation differently, and that
Okay.
is that is the point.
Well, mate, sure, that is not the point, though. No, people will get affected differently and handle the situation differently, right? It's the point is the people that get affected the same way. You guys seem to think that somehow that response, that fear, causes a certain disease. And I'm telling you, no, you can't make that distinguish. The best you can say is, yeah, those people that are affected somehow, they're going to get some sort of disease. Some are going to get what's called the 1,000 mile stare. Some are going to have PTSD. Some are going to have whatever, right? Some are going to get liver disease. But you can't correlate that specific fear to a specific organ getting diseased. That's what I'm
Well,
saying.
you
Well,
kind
don't
of
say you guys.
you kind of demonstrated that you can make a correlation. For instance, when you said anybody who's been in a bar fight knows the adrenaline response and they start shaking. So you're saying here you have a category called bar fight that most people in your mind would experience an adrenaline release, right?
Right.
And
Now,
I would agree
are
with
they
you,
all going to
but I could make the same contention on that basis, right? It's like, how do you know that? How can you make that correlation that everybody in a bar fight will get an adrenaline response? But
Have you
I would
ever
agree
been in
with
a
you.
bar fight? Have you ever been in a bar
Right
fight?
now, of course, and it's a highly adrenalated. It
Did
causes
you
me to
ever
shake.
not get an adrenaline rush when you were about to get into a fight?
Have I ever what? Not gotten an adrenaline? No, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So what I would agree with you is that there seems to be a universal response with respect to a bar fight is that we all get that adrenaline response. Well, there's other kinds of stresses that we all could experience in life, not just a bar fight, but a death fright, like a diagnosis shock, or a territorial fear of aggression that affects the bronchioles, or a separation conflict that affects the skin. These are like the bar fight insofar as you can categorize it and make these generalizations that anybody who has been in this situation could generally experience this kind of response. And it's just
Yeah,
another
now you're
biological
connecting.
response.
That's my point. That's my point. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I'm trying to
Right.
tell you there should be a correlation between these kind of stresses shown, like, and you're telling me no, they're affected differently. Each person gets affected
Well,
differently
I
when I
guess,
bring you
okay,
down that road.
to rewind 30 minutes back when that was brought up, I just wanted to make the point that you have to appreciate the individual perception of the individual. Like that has to be accounted for or appreciated. But I definitely agree that in general, certain situations tend to have a similar response in people. So for instance, when a
Yeah.
child dies, that is going to be, generally speaking, something that affects people in the majority of cases in a specific way, affecting their reproductive organs, right? When you lose a child, it results in a shock to the brain, which then governs an adaptation in the reproductive organs. And it actually serves a biological purpose to increase your capacity to reproduce. So, but that adaptation comes with consequences down the road, which are what we've called in history disease symptoms. But
I've heard coyotes do this, by the way. Do you know what I'm talking about? I got this from Joe Rogan. You know what I'm getting at?
no, coyotes, what do they do?
Joe Rogan was talking to his guest about how it's basically impossible to get rid of a coyote problem because if you go out like say like you're in the state of Texas or whatever, and they're like, hey, we got a real serious coyote problem. We will pay you $10 for every coyote head you turn in, right? Thinking that's going to solve the problem. Oh, just get more people to hunt them. But there's like a relay system in the howls they do at night that will
Right.
actually have like a psychophysical response in the pregnant females, and it's so crazy. But if the all the males around them at night howl to a certain frequency, the females will actually give birth to more coyote pups than they would have if they didn't hear that howl. Depending on, and they notice signal a certain howl depending on the population that is. Like they're trying to maintain a certain population of coyotes, and if they see a drop in it, they will signal the females to make a biological adjustment to give
Mhm.
birth to a larger litter. You know, and it's
Yeah,
like,
that's wild.
and that
You know, yeah,
it's so wild, and that's the whole point. Like you won't get rid of them because if you attack them, they will respond, in turn, and if the more you kill them, the larger litters the females will birth to compensate. And that's a crazy like psychophysiological sort of adaptation that they can do. And the
yeah,
same thing probably happens with us, just to a less obvious degree.
it proves the rule that life is intelligent, right? Biology is highly intelligent, and
Subconsciously intelligent.
yeah, exactly. And so
Hmm.
it's just such a beautiful add-on to that demonstrated fact that life expresses this intense intelligence that that we can now contextualize disease symptoms as a consequence of intelligent biological adaptations that went on in life. So the disease, we don't like to think of disease as intelligent. It's a nuisance and it's a problem, but it fits within the context of a intelligent response of biology. It's just that response comes with consequences. So it's like,
There's always got to be a cost. You're right. That's the first law of alchemy. Everything has a cost. If you increase one thing, you're going to have to decrease another.
mhm.
No, I get it, man. If let's all be honest. Every drug has its withdrawal symptoms, and there's plenty of drugs that are in storage in your own body. When you get that adrenaline rush, when you get forced into a bar fight or flight response, whatever, it isn't as if it's a free ride to get that adrenaline rush. There will be a cost to be paid later for
Mhm.
that adrenaline dump, and if there's a particular organ, right? If there's a particular organ that is responsible for generating adrenaline, well, then that's the one that's going to have to do overtime to make up for its donation of adrenaline, right? I mean, what is the organ that supplies adrenaline? Is it like the liver or something?
Hey,
The
Well,
adrenal
on top of the
gland.
real
kidneys,
quick.
it's the adrenal glands. Yeah.
Yeah, the adrenal gland.
Where are they though?
Right above the kidneys. It's like
They're-
sit on top of the kidneys. Yeah.
Hey,
Okay, cool. You're
when he
roboting,
got
bro. Sorry.
injected with that E. coli bacteria, you know,
Wait, sorry. What were you saying? We couldn't hear you.
You're roboting, dude.
All I heard was E. coli. E. coli bacteria. But yeah, that's the other thing about this this discovery is it
bacteria.
recontextualizes bacteria.
Hey man, I don't know what to tell you, good white, but you're just roboting really hardcore. I think someone should just take a step to continue this.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
assume I know what he's saying. He's saying something about E. coli, and there's a bacteria called E. coli, and maybe he's saying, well, how do you explain E. coli disease or something like that, perhaps?
Wim
Well,
Hof.
that's
the Wim
poisoning, like you
Hof.
said, right?
Right. That's right. If you drink enough of anything, you can get poisoned from it, and
Yeah,
otherwise,
water
a coli bacteria.
poisoning,
Yeah, otherwise,
alcohol poisoning, whatever.
Yeah, minute amounts of E. coli. There's
No, hold on.
demonstration. Okay.
Okay, look, I got a better connection. I can tell.
Hey, that's better
talking
now.
about the Wim Hof E. coli.
Go for it, dude. Tell us about the Wim Hof E. coli. You got a better connection now, for sure.
He he used that fight or flight, which pumped him full of all those hormones and stuff. But so they're not always bad, because what it did was created an immune response to that E. coli, and he didn't have any symptoms. But the people who didn't do those breathing exercises did. So that's kind of interesting. You guys want to talk about that? Because I keep roboting, dude.
No, you're better. You're totally better now. And I'd say that there's always a cost, right? Whenever there is an obstacle that you need to overcome, it's great. It's really great if you can overcome this obstacle, but you always do have to expend and put some miles on your car, right? Put some mileage on your odometer, right? To deal with any sort of stress. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything has its cost. And it's probably the reason he doesn't do that on a regular basis. You don't want to subject yourself to more stress. Even if you grow from it, you're gonna reach a certain point where it's just not worth it anymore. You don't the thing. You don't work out at the gym every day. You take your break days to recover.
The fight or flight thing, the response, the adrenaline, it's not detrimental. It's actually
It is.
Mother Nature. Hold on, it's a Mother Nature adaptation to save your life at that particular moment. It either
but
helps
there's a
you.
cost.
Let me finish.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. It either helps you fight the beast or run away from the beast or whatever the thing, and that's good. It gives you that extra energy. Now the problem is when you're in a stressful situation and you induce that all the time continuously, then it becomes detrimental.
No, it's detrimental long term every time. Like when you get put into those situations where you get an unnatural sort of adrenaline dump, it does benefit you short term to deal with the immediate issue, but it does put unnecessary stress on your system to like replenish your supply. Your body is being asked to work harder than it wants to, and you'll pay for it down the line. So, like, just to put it in a different context, a person who gets into a bar fight every weekend, even if they win, even if they never get even a single punch landed on them, just it just isn't natural and overall positive for your health to get adrenaline rushes on a regular basis. It is something that is useful, but not something you want not something you want to happen on a frequent, schedule. Like, if you can avoid it, please do, because that's an extreme response to an extreme situation, and there will be a long-term cost to your health of going through these situations. Not to say exercise isn't valuable, but you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, sort of, and try to avoid certain things. There is a tax to be paid, is all I'm saying. For every adrenaline rush you experience, even if it gives you the strength to save the child trapped underneath the car, win the bar fight, whatever, there is a tax that will be owed for that, extra strength, and you will pay for it. You're not gonna ever receive a biological benefit that doesn't have an equal and opposite cost.
Well, that's an assumption, but yeah, it does make sense in a way if you repeat it over and over. But I don't think a bar fight once a week. I don't think that'll be detrimental to your health. As a matter of fact, some people enjoy that. It's been my experience. You should meet some of my friends that I had during the
Yeah,
years.
It's true. I think a
anytime you
lot
have,
of people,
yeah,
a lot
anytime
of
you have
people
an
could use
adrenaline
more.
dump.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say a lot of people could use more bar fights in today's world, especially among men and
Sure.
kids. That would be
Yeah, anytime you have
probably
an
a good thing.
adrenaline dump or you exert, you have what's called a latent period when your body is like short of those chemicals and it replenishes before it can be kind of reset.
Yeah, which is a
Yeah.
cost. The healing process is a very taxing process. It takes a lot of resources and effort and energy, and I'd even say life force to
Yeah.
replenish your organs. So
Yeah.
I,
If there's like one takeaway with the German medicine discoveries, it's like if you're diagnosed with a cancer and it's a healing phase cancer, so for instance, like bronchial tubes, a growth happening in the bronchial tubes, that's actually a replenishing of the previous ulcerations that happened in that organ.
i-
In any
is
case,
that lung cancer?
that's bronchial lung cancer, yeah, or small cell kind of bronchial lung
Okay,
cancer, different from the alveoli cells. But
you're saying it's not a bad thing necessarily.
I'm saying the takeaway is it's the panic and fear that accompanies that diagnosis, which really ends up being the demise of the person. And that's a lot of the cases in, you get a diagnosis and the doctor doesn't know other to say other than, oh my God, you have cancer, right? And if that puts you into a state of panic, now you're conflict active with panic, and that's just taxing your body, which is trying to essentially heal an organ that had undergone a pretty serious adaptation for a long period of time. Hence the kind of extravagant healing phase, which is the cancer. It's like a profound restoration phase in that organ. So if you're in
So
a
what's
state
the
of
balance?
panic, what what's the balance of? I'm
Yeah,
not sure what that is.
I feel like the expression like use it or lose it is appropriate, because like whatever glands or organs are associated with giving you an adrenaline dump, you don't want to go your whole life, say like 70 years, right, and then ask your body 70 years old to give you your first adrenaline dump, right? Because like they're not prepared for that. They're untrained. There is a sort of balance of trauma that you actually want to invite into your life. so that your body is like exercised and fit for these upcoming situations. Like there's definitely this benefit of challenging yourself and putting yourself through ordeals in order to be as healthy as possible. Because the body isn't designed to just sit on a comfy sofa and eat, soft food all day. You know what I mean? It needs that it needs that trauma in order to be the best it can be. Because like a trauma-free life, you're probably going to die just as soon as someone who has a trauma like extreme lifestyle. And that's I'm basing this just off of philosophy of my own. But I'd say
Yeah, no,
it's probably for your benefit to go through some struggles in life. I
yeah,
think.
I would almost say that's like how you could start to contextualize and define what the immune system really is. If you want to define immune system as that which keeps your body free of disease, well, if you understand the cause of the disease is this psyche, brain, organ, biological programs, okay, and they're initiated by shocks or conflicts in life, then the real immune system, not battling bacteria that are out to get you, blah, 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 that's the old paradigm. But the real immune system is building your strength and resilience to meet challenges in life. And so, yeah, I would agree that there's definitely a purpose to meeting challenges and experiencing challenges. And another thing, like people are like, well, so why has disease gone down, or why has disease gone up? How do you account for statistical changes over decades or hundreds of years? So it's at a case by case thing, but so for instance, cancer has risen in the last 50 years, definitely. But infectious diseases have gone down over the last 100 years. How do we understand?
Couldn't that just be explained by people are living longer and thus are getting cancer because they're living longer? Because they're reaching older age?
Absolutely that, but also I think more of an explanation is diagnostic screenings. Okay, they didn't really exist 50 years ago or 100 years ago nearly as much as they do now. Now everybody's going to get a checkup, and then the doctor will find quote unquote cancer cells, and that will start a process of shock, and then further cancers in the body or further growths happening in the body directed from the brain. And so this rise in cancer is really, I think, stemming from a rise in screening and diagnostic processes that end up causing tremendous fear in
propaganda,
people.
Kind of a disease propaganda or a fear propaganda.
Looking in hindsight, it kind of looks like it's like a way to strike fear in the hearts of people by making sure they go to the doctor to get checked for this and that and this and that, all under this past historical definition of what disease is, and that it's a malignancy and you better nip it in the bud, yada, 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 which, that's just the whole old model. But yeah, I would just say cancer has risen in the past 50, 70 years is because diagnostic screenings have risen. It's not necessarily that they are actually rising in an organic sense. But the flip side of that is, why have diseases decreased, over swaths of time?
Yeah.
Well, they call it infectious, but really in general, diseases have fallen from 1890 to 1970, and then now to today. Lots of diseases have fallen.
We also have a great sewage system now.
Yeah, well, right. It's a rising standard of living.
Like they say about the Black Plague. I mean, they say the Black Plague was like they're shitting in the streets. The rats are eating the shit.
That's not what the shit is. Dysentery, dude. Like, it has nothing to do with shit. Like, it was like rats and fleas and shit like that. No, it has nothing to do with shit.
I think it's all kind of connected, but whatever.
No. Like that's not how it spreads. It's primarily like vermin and like other humans. It has nothing to do with shit. Shit is dysentery, which is actually the thing that used to kill people like constantly.
Yeah, I would the way I contextualize Black Plague. I mean, I don't really even know there was like a ton of symptoms relative to Black Plague, but there's like canker sores under the arm. That could be something else, but I like to speculate that the Black Plague was really a mass poisoning event. But yeah, poisonings can cause dysentery and all kinds of problems. And So yeah, the rising standard of living, in my opinion, is really what amounted to a reduction in disease, because with the rising standard of living, not only do you have better nutrition and whatever to heal the body whenever the body needs to heal, but you also have the capacity to resolve conflicts quicker, sooner, easier when you have money. Okay, so like there's no.
Why would you like to say, you like to think that it was a mass poisoning event?
Well, because it was so far back in history that it's hard to really substantiate everybody's speculating. The infectious model to explain Black Plague is total speculation, and so we're all speculating. In my opinion, the further back in history you go, the harder it is to really get to the bottom of it. But you go to the symptoms. You go to the symptoms. What are the symptoms, and then what is known to cause those symptoms? You have to find that question. And if a poison can be ascribed to cause,
that's an awful lot of
symptoms.
poison in a society that could barely do mass trade. What the fuck are they poisoning them with, man? It's kind of silly.
I don't know. Maybe poisoning the wells, because everybody's using the same well.
They're poisoning. They're poisoning every well to the point where a third of Europe died. Okay.
Let me ask the crucial question here. Let me ask the crucial question here.
Probably not that much poison, but
if you wanna describe the Black Plague as a poisoning event, what is the source of the poison, and how did it get in contact with so many people?
How do they derive the poison, or are you saying what poison did they use, or if that is the case?
No, all I said was, you heard what I said. I mean, what do you think? There's a group of people actively poisoning people intentionally on a mass scale, or what's the source of the? I said, what's the source of the poison? How did it reach so many people?
Yeah, a malevolent. Malevolent
intentional.
Intention. Intentional. Yeah.
How do you back that up?
That's why I have no problem saying I'm speculating when I say that. I don't know
why. But why?
Why
do you think that the Black Plague was man-made?
Because I don't have a better explanation, and I certainly don't have a proof of a virus to explain it. So,
what about if it was a bunch of witches that ordered some bats out of Wuhan, China,
right?
for bat soup,
Right. Yeah, it sounds like that kind of story, and
do you think
anybody could believe it?
What's the? I mean,
wait a minute.
I know
wait a minute. Wait. The Black Plague isn't caused by viruses. Wait a minute. It's
I don't know. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Say okay. Fine. Which do you know? Do you know the specific bacteria by chance?
I don't remember. It's just
yeah.
Let's all keep it amicable here, okay? This dude, what's your name? The Leon,
Theleon. Theleon. Yeah.
Theleon. You're keeping it amicable. I just ask everyone to keep it on the same amicable level as him.
Dude, weed gives me the killing will.
Well, whatever, man. Just do your best. He's answering the questions. He's done it so far. No reason.
I don't think I'm being aggressive.
Continue.
Yeah, no, okay. You're good. You're good. Yeah. So if it's a bacteria, there's this whole infectious disease myth movement, which is really kind of questioning the basic paradigm of germ theory, and so yeah, it's is it the bacteria? Even actually the traditional model doesn't even claim it's the bacteria that causes the disease. They say it's the immune system failing that causes the bacteria. So it actually becomes kind of an unfalsifiable hypothesis, because if you have the bacteria or whatever, and you give it to one person and he doesn't get sick, you could just say, oh, his immune system was strong. But then you give the bacteria to another person and then that person gets sick, you could say, aha, it was the bacteria. But there's been studies trying to demonstrate person-to-person transmission of a given disease, and they fail miserably. And then, of course, there's the whole isolation of certain particles. But if we just keep it to bacteria, germ theory is it's not what I go by anymore. I'll just put it that way. Obviously, I used to think okay, yeah, germs cause disease. Everybody thought that, but I no longer go by that.
let me corner you onto one specific topic here, if you don't mind, because
Okay.
I'm so ready for you to give me an answer that I've always been looking for. But there's these fellow students of mine that I went to school with as a child, and these special boys who they're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yes. Yes.
we don't allow peanuts in the entire school because this
Oh
one
yeah.
person is gonna die if any of their food has any sort of peanut contact in their fucking lunch meal or whatever, right? Like
Hmm.
and so I mean, what's your take on that? Like, why would, because I eat peanuts and I'm fine, and I assume they're just like me, that they could eat a peanut and be fine, but it's somehow some sort of like psychophysical no, I mean, it is even psychophysical, because if you give a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to a kid who doesn't know he's eating peanuts, he will, even though he
Yeah.
didn't even understand. So
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
does that like alchemical process pan out in your opinion, where he doesn't even know he ate peanuts, but it will cause his throat to swell up? Like, what
Well,
is
okay.
that?
So if we go to a little less severe of a reaction, other than like the anaphylactic shock of a swollen throat that kills a
No,
kid.
no,
Uh,
no, no. Stick to that, man. Stick to that.
well, okay. Well, what it is an allergy. All right. And the
But what does that
traditional
even
model.
mean, though?
Okay,
Right,
that's right. That's what I'll try to describe. Okay, so in the
right.
traditional model, allergies are caused by allergens that cause an immune response or an immune system reaction, and causes the immune system to kind of go haywire or to attack itself. So it causes like some kind of autoimmune response in the body. So these allergens are the bad guys, and then when they come into your body, they just cause havoc in the immune system. It would appear like that's the case. Okay,
There
but
can't be a conscious aspect to it, though. There
well,
can't
no,
be a conscious.
there
No,
can be a
no,
subconscious
but
aspect. Yeah.
no, it doesn't matter. There's no conscious element to my buddy being fed a peanut butter or a little bit of peanut butter mixed in. His throat will swell. If I like sneak it in his food, if I lace his, sandwich with a little bit of peanut butter,
I agree.
he
I
will
agree. It's
he w- he will have that
the
response. So there's no conscious element to it. He will
well,
have that
okay.
response.
If the body senses the peanut, then yes, it'll have that response. Okay, but the question is, what's the cause of that response? And
It doesn't have anything to do with consciousness. It has nothing to do with consciousness.
well, okay, before we get too philosophical, you can never separate consciousness from biology ever. You can never make that distinction. That's actually what I believe to be like the major fundamental error in medicine, is to think that the body is a machine and
How the
and the
fuck
mind
would
is separate.
consciousness? Come
Well,
on,
okay,
man.
wait,
That
wait,
sounds
wait.
ridiculous.
Is this fundamental?
It is, yes.
Okay, all right. So you were during this whole conversation when I was describing the
Yeah, I've
German
been
medicine.
here.
Okay. All right, so let me give you the German medicine take on allergies, all right? Because they do have an explanation for this. What occurs is when you have that conflict shock experience, which governs a brain organ adaptation, the consequences of which are diseases, blah, blah, blah. When you have that conscious conflict shock experience, your subconscious, your body is on high alert in that moment, and it scans the environment, it scans the food that is in your mouth, it scans the immediate sensory apparatus of what you're experiencing, and it takes note of several components of that. Like if there's a lot of pollen in the air during that conflict shock experience, it will take note of that. All right. Now, what happens is you go through the biological program resolves, and the organ undergoes its healing phase, restoration phase with inflammatory symptoms, okay? Sneezing or whatever organ was affected, it goes through these inflammatory symptoms. What can happen during that healing process is the mind body can get re-triggered back to the conflict shock experience. Like, for instance, if the conflict resurfaces in life, the program is going to return on, change the organ from a healing phase back to a conflict active adaptation phase, where the symptoms go away and the organ's now conflict active adapting because the conflict resurfaced in life. All right, that's a basic example. Like the actual physical problem came back, causing the organ to now adapt again. Well, on a subconscious level, what can happen is these sensory impressions, like pollen or peanuts that you were eating at the moment of the conflict shock, can trigger the subconscious mind to remember and recall the conflict shock experience, leading to a relapse of the biological program active phase. So it's like a momentary relapse, re-engaging the organ, all right, for a period of a moment of time, or like a few seconds, or whatever it is. And that is what then results back into the organ inflammatory presentation of symptoms. So the allergen for any given individual is something in their environment that was existing when they had that shock a moment that impacted the brain and the organ. And that allergen or that substance can trigger the biological program in the brain organ, causing these symptoms to flare back up a year later.
Can I
Okay.
ask?
That is not pan out. That is
Yeah,
not pan
hold
out
on.
at
No,
all.
no, I don't. No, I don't. Anaphylaxis. Do you know what anaphylaxis is? What actually
Yeah,
happened?
that's a very serious thing. And I'm not, here's the context, here's the model, here's the brain organ process, but I'm not trying to say like
Can I
I
ask
could
a
solve
philosophical
everybody's
question to you?
problems.
Can I ask a philosophical question to you?
Yeah.
Are you your body?
I actually like just going on another direction. I would say that the body is more like a projection of the mind. That's how I would see it. It's like
Fair
a
enough.
physical projection of a mental primary existence state.
Because it's weird how to me, like would you classify what you're saying as like like holistic more so, but like it's almost like to me it's just on a philosophical level. It's almost like a product of materialism. Do you know what I mean? To take it too far.
You
If that
mean like
makes
it's like
sense.
this? It's like the same fault as materialism to
Yeah,
take.
it kind of like it springs from the notion of materialism, like in the sense that, well, we are this body, and like it negates these, like, let's say, anaphylactic responses as like a subconscious. You know what I mean? To say it's just subconscious, to me, it almost alludes to the idea that you are your body, kind of a thing, which I philosophically reject. And I just was thinking like this idea of chemicals in the body outside of your subconscious or any of that stuff will affect the chemicals in the body. Like if you know what I mean? Like there's no getting around like, putting poison in the body.
Well,
Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, well, I
somebody
knew it
brought
was
up
poison, so that's why it killed me. You know what I mean? Like,
somebody
you know?
brought up, like, yeah, I agree pretty much practically on a pragmatic scale 100%, but somebody brought up Wim Hof, and I was going to kind of go in that direction a little while ago. It's like, well, Wim Hof does these practices and he gets in the right mental state, and then he can like overcome these challenges of a chemical nature that other people just couldn't fathom, and scientists say, oh, that's impossible or whatever. But yeah, the body, mind, or that the whole topic of biology, mind, it really is like big, and the mind is powerful, as they say, and like you hear stories of like yogis who drink a whole glass of whatever poison or whatever bacteria or whatever, and they're fine, and it's like or like people that get into the right mind state, or like the
See, but that
placebo
shit reminds
effect,
me of
you know?
like that shit just takes me right. You ever seen like the guy who's floating with the stick trick? It's a trick, like and like they pretend to be like some sadhu that's like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
On
they
like
got
America's Got Talent or something like
yeah,
that.
and they got like a metal stick that goes and it's got a little seat in it, and it's stuck into the ground, so it's like it
Yeah,
looks like floating. You know what I
yeah.
mean? That's how I look at all of that
Like it's
woo
just a
woo.
trick. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's a hustle that they were pulling on the Europeans. You know what I mean? To be like spiritual
Well,
gurus and shit.
that would kind of
I
be
don't know.
the materialistic interpretation that that we are our body, in the sense that like it's a machine and you can't max the machine past a certain limit, and you just have to sucker up with the fact that you live in a biological machine that has its limits. And then, but I always love the stories that demonstrate that no, you could definitely surpass these
Well,
limits
I
that
think you can
don't make
definitely
sense.
like I think you can definitely make the body do amazing things. I mean, like, you know, I
Yeah.
think like you can relax certain muscles really. You know, like you know, if you consciously think about it, right? Like, you know what I mean? You can actually like you have to think to relax certain muscles because they're so tense, if you will. You know what I mean? Like where your mind can make your body do things you don't even realize you're suffering from. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like I
yeah,
think
good things and negative things, the placebo and the nocebo effect, right? It's just, yeah, the question is, how do we tie all these variables together, these big questions? I always thought like a huge portion of universities and sciences and everything should have went full steam into the question of the placebo and the nocebo effect to really try to figure out this new dimension of understanding biology in a quote materialistic sense, or even in like a mechanistical causal
well, I
sense. Like,
think the
what
last
is
two
the placebo
years
effect?
I think the last 2 years have been quite the experiment in that regard. I think they're very
Yeah,
much
maybe they
interested.
do. They have a
You
good
know?
understanding of this whole subject and they know how to use it against us, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, they definitely did black operation studies and scientific experiments on the question of the mind. I mean, government controlling the mind. They know what the fuck they're controlling.
Well, I've often felt it's like, they're playing like, like the idea of like climate change is just like social climate. And this social climate is heating up. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, it's like it's all allegory and they're so clever. I almost have to sit back and just clap because you can't even explain it. You just look crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. They definitely have some tricks up their sleeve. Trauma-based mind control. You could see like why didn't their story hold true in the last 2 years? Why were there like blatant disconnects and like contradictions in the mainstream narrative? It's almost like, in my opinion, it's the way to program a mind is to create cognitive dissonance in the mind, and the way you create cognitive dissonance in the mind is you split the mind, you give it one story, and then you quickly damage that comfort zone by giving it a different story. And then it puts you in this sort of like imbalanced state where your mind is now open because you've been contradicted so many times. And now your mind's wide open and they could just program you. It's like trauma based mind control. But yeah, they're tricky bastards.
Yeah, it is interesting how it's all played out because you still have like amidst all the confusion, like the only people that are making sense are like the crazy conspiracy heads. You know what I mean? Like that have been, or at least the ones in the middle of the road, anyway. You know,
Yeah.
that's what's cool is that they are open to suggestion, and I think that's interesting. I think that's what we're really watching is like the like you have a bell curve, and like all the people in the middle is who the awakening is for. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's like it's not for the fringes. You know what I mean? It's for the mainstream because they've got to realize that like the politics aren't what they thought, the medical isn't what they thought.
Mm.
And then hopefully, what's cool is there's answers to all those questions these normies have, and like that's why I've always liked cats like Joe Rogan and stuff like that, like the mainstream. Uh, kind of like sheepdogs of like social thought. You know
Mm.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And and they're, I've tried to like, because you got to think they're holding hands with the general public, so it's not like they can go down conspiracy street. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
that's
they're,
a
you know,
yeah, that's an interesting I have to wonder about Joe Rogan. There's other people like Robert Kennedy Jr. He represents kind of like a leader in the
yeah, yeah,
alternative medical.
oh yeah, yep.
And you want these people to really just go balls out and just go full steam in the directions of like, you know,
Well, that's where
no.
even like I big up Trump, and I don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? Because it's like people then like get all well. He was pro jabs and all this, and it's like but
Yeah.
for the normie, they need that. And for the
Yeah,
normie,
maybe.
you know what I mean? And for the normie, like the difference is in whether or not it was mandated or not. Because they wanted it anyway. The difference was whether or not you were going to force somebody. And like,
Well, they wanted it only because they were conditioned to want it. I
well,
really
you
think
can,
the only
right?
thing.
No, regardless, right, of course. But my point is that you're dealing with the product of that conditioning. It's not like you're just dealing.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
not dealing with like
and
a malleable person.
well, yeah, you are. You're dealing. You should
Well,
focus on the cause of the conditioning is an authority. Really, all a normie quote unquote needs is an authority structure to feel comfortable with it,
right, but they also
and
like if they also do need it though. To say that they don't need it is foolish.
that they
Like,
don't need sort of a soft
yeah, to
narrative
say
on
that
the.
they right, and that's my point. Is like that's why like what we're really watching is the normie go through the process as we all have, right? But it's like now it's like the general subconscious. Like, is it going to explode? Can it handle it? Oh my god! Like, you know what I mean? Like, what what are they going to do? Because it's not about us. It's about what the fuck these like nut jobs that are out there. Yeah, like, and my point is like, and I was watching a dude try to, he was a sheepdog. He was like running sheep, and he was saying how if he came out into to feed all of his sheep, right, with his big bowl of corn, the sheep would mob him. Do you know what I mean? And they would just they would tackle him. They would fucking, you know what I mean? They'd like wreck him for the feed. Whereas when he has that sheepdog, all of them back off, and then he can go
Yeah.
in and put the food down, and then he can walk away, and then they all go and they all get their food. Whereas if he didn't have that sheepdog, he'd never be able to put the food in all the different containers and have all the sheep eat. And like that just I don't know why, but that just made like so much sense to me in the sense of like it's unfortunate, but they don't know any better. It's like weird, man. So what we're watching is like you're trying to wake up sheep who some people aren't built for it. You know what I mean? Like, and that's why they're gonna need the Rogans and the like all that shit's in place.
Yeah, but then who's orchestrating it? And I almost don't like the whole sheep analogy. We're all sheep. Because we all have a nervous system, and that nervous system can be conditioned by our culture. And the most powerful conditioning agent is the authority structure. And so we're all conditioned by our authority. That's why it feels comfortable. That's why we celebrate when a famous person, an authority, comes out and says, I think this about this contentious issue. We're all like, yeah, somebody up there in the higher echelons voicing my opinion. It feels so wonderful and great.
And the reason for that though is that because your aunt, whatever, that won't believe a word that you say,
That's right, because we understand.
will accept Joe Schmo, the actor, coming out and
Yeah,
saying.
exactly, because we
And so like
understand
this,
how
and this is why,
powerful.
right?
Yeah,
And these are all mechanisms of society. That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like, and like, it's just weird how I think we're all watching the process of this waking up thing. It's interesting as fuck. But I think also too is like, you know, like the idea of like religion, right? Like regardless of it,
Mhm.
it stands as a moral authority against the state. Do you know what I mean? And that's huge. And that's why like it's interesting to me like the whole paradigm of materialism and like not having a faith. You know what I mean? Because to have a faith, to have a religion or something to that effect, is to have a higher authority than the state, which just gets me back full circle to our medical conversation of like, i.e., the spirit being separate from the body, and
Right.
understanding that there is these differences. It's like like the idea. I always loved like the Masons talking about the square and the compass, and how the square was for measuring the flat Earth, and the compass was for measuring the angle of the circular sky. You know what I mean? There's a difference
Mhm.
between the land, and there's a difference between the sky, and the land represented the body, and the sky represented the soul. Like they're
Yeah,
inherent contradictions. They can't work together.
Yeah,
in that
yeah,
regard. It's cool. I love that shit.
yeah. I don't know. It's a wonderful question. Mind, body, soul, body. It's the great mystery.
Right. And
And
outside of that, then you look into the normie land, and that's where we see the other discussion of sociology and shit, it's like, oh.
yeah, or like everything is material. That's yeah, these are all great points, man. I appreciate that. Um, in a sense, when you were talking about religion and the state, it would seem now that like religious thought or Christianity or anything like that does seem to be opposed or being contradicted by like the state authority structure that kind of exists right now, or like the authority system that kind of poo-poos it. But in the past, the church, the church of religion was definitely the authority structure. Then, I like the principle of science insofar as it's like, no, it's about personal, individual confirmation of what you can know. And in that spirit, it's about individual autonomy and confirming what you can know as an individual. And that kind of goes into kind of like personal spirituality and finding your authority within. And I like that direction. And I think that's ultimately how I would take any kind of religious notion. It's really ultimately about finding individual connection to the soul or the source. And yeah, we kind of live in an extreme in our world today where we're all so dependent on what other people think and authority systems, and we just want the authority to work in our favor. And there really isn't no spirituality in our reality, in our culture at present, or personal individual authority.
Well, yeah, it's like the
And
atheist is the super soldier of the state, man.
yeah, and if you think about it, it's because for the past 500 years or whatever, we've tried to explain reality according to the materialistic, mechanistic principle, which actually completely leaves out soul, the whole question of soul. We're just not going to talk about
Well,
consciousness,
yeah,
soul.
that's
We're just
why.
gonna we're
That's
just
why.
gonna define things materialistically, and that's actually, you know, well, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just gonna say that's how or it's like I said earlier with the square and the compass, right? Like it's like they understood the difference between the Earth and the spherical nature of the sky. Yeah, one second.
Right.
And so what they did was in their attempt to make materialism, being the goal, they took the soul aspect of it and they rounded everything of man and tried to combine these two philosophies, i.e., that's how you get a globe Earth. So they've taken the soul and tried to superimpose it on the earth so as to make you feel as though the earth and the soul are the same, i.e., materialism. You're just a monkey on a rock. You know what I mean? Like,
Well,
and
that's
that's how.
even doing them. That's even doing them credit. I would say they were just excising the soul entirely and saying there isn't nothing but material. And in
Right,
fact, we
right.
can explain all of reality. The whole universe is just a material explosion following natural
Well, they
laws.
even extended it
And
into they extended the soul concept into outer space, into the earth is just a part of outer space. Like, it's weird. It's
Mhm.
interesting how they've done it.
Yeah.
And then you take like the whole metric system. Like the metric system was created to not be under the imperial system, i.e., the king system. So they created the metric system after the French Revolution in order to get rid of the imperial system, which was the king system, which was the godly system.
Mhm.
I find that interesting too, man.
Yeah, that's a whole interesting time period for sure. Yeah, there's actually a really good YouTube channel that goes into these kind of historical questions, even ancient Greece, but also the French Revolution most recently, and a lot of other kind of hidden histories and ancient civilizations. Not in that term, but the name is Asha Logos, and I have mad respect for that guy, Asha Logos. He does a good monotone. It seems very unbiased, just kind of like account of history as it's told by the historians that lived at that time, and it's a whole other picture of of history that we don't really get. But,
What was the channel?
Asha Logos, ASHA Logos.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really like great visual. It's really like quite. I don't know if entertaining is the right word, but like it's really pleasing to visual. It's like very visually pleasing, and he kind of has a monotonous voice, but it's very intriguing quotes and text that he pulls from. Talking about like European history, especially.